Today I'm talking with my old friend Luca Minudel. We talked about how playing rugby triggered his growth mindset, the start of his speaker career at age 18, and the challenge of giving up control with the collaborative spirit of agile. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, and hello with me. I have Luca. And so hello. And for the people that don't know it, let's bring it a little bit on the screen. I'm here in Belgium, and Luca, if I'm correct, you're in London. So we'll just ask Google Earth to show us a little bit. It's not that far from where I am, and on my side it's almost 7 o'clock in the evening. And what's the time on your side?
Almost 6 o'clock.
Almost
Great
6 o'clock. It's
time.
a 1 hour time difference between Belgium and the UK. And well, we jumped into it immediately, but for the people that don't know you, Luca, what's a good thing to know about you? What do you want people to know about you?
Well, something to say, I'm Italian. I'm sure my accent is giving that away very quickly. My hometown is actually Conegliano. It's a very small town near Venice, but is known for being the Prosecco town at the
Mm.
center of the Prosecco area. What else? Uh, a few years I moved in Stockholm, 10 years ago now. And then in the last 6 years, like your map show, I'm here in London.
I should have actually made a map with multiple locations, but if I do that with everyone, then we're 5 minutes on clicking for some people. So let's keep it to where you are at this moment. Okay, and well, you didn't mention it, but for the people that want to know, you wrote a book, Living Complexity, which is already multiple editions that was published, I would say.
Yes, yes. It's been the effort of my last few years, first on Limpub and now on Amazon.
So and it's yeah I would really recommend it. It's nice to read it and to learn about it. But let's jump right into these questions. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but have influenced you in who you are?
Well, I'm quite a private person. There are so many things, but let me tell you one thing. One thing that I will say is about the influence that sport uh,
Mhm.
had in my life and also in my professional career. And two examples come into my mind. Judo. I practiced the judo for a few years when I was young, and that had a huge influence in terms of discipline. Uh,
Mm.
I sometimes say that there are at least two flavor of agile, a disciplined one and a more chaotic and impulsive one. Let's say that my judo practice took me toward the disciplined approach of agile. The other big influence has been rugby. So rugby is not that popular in Italy, but still, it seems like I got in all less popular sports. And rugby had a huge influence in terms of teamwork and also in terms of growth mindset. If you want to know some story, I can tell you more.
Yeah, please share some more.
Well, when I think about teamwork, I it always come up this experience to me. I was about 14 years old, and this was my first match of the season. So I was out of shape. We
As
were,
many were probably from your age at that time.
yeah, and we were close to our try line, trying to defend hardly, and we managed to go away, but I was too tired, out of breath to run with my team. My team was closer to middle field, and one opponent cut the scrum in two. And I was still there, close to the try line, and this tall, heavy built guy, 2 years older than me, was running toward me. The first things that I felt was, oh, I'm scared. Should I tackle him or let him pass? Then I watched my team look at me, and I was the only man that could stop that guy. And so the fear went away. I screamed something like, take down the giant, but it was just a way to get the anxiety away. And then I tackled him. I didn't have no choice because my team was counting on me, and I was the last man standing behind the opponent and the try line. And that gives the sense of the feeling that still I have when I work in team, and it reflects some of the experience that I had with a few good teams I've been part of.
It's interesting that you tell that story in the sense that you started off with, oh, I couldn't follow, so you were too slow because you were out of shape. But actually that helped your team in a way that you didn't predict, because if you would be able to follow, you would have been in the scrum, and yeah, that person would have passed you as well. And so now, because you were out of shape, you were still able to help your team in a way that you didn't think when that person jumped out. So that's in multiple ways a very good story, because it shows how, yeah, even if you're feared, that yeah, if you have a team counting on you, that you jump into that fear, and you just ignore it, and look at, okay, I'll do whatever I can to help it. And of course you didn't know if you were able to do it, but you had the team supporting you in a way, and you were able to do that. So that's a very powerful story. So and so that, did that inspire you to get into shape, or did you think, no, it's actually good, I can stay out of shape?
Well, I can tell you, actually, running and being out of breath is also. Uh, there was a coach, a rugby coach. It was small. He didn't have the physique du role to play rugby, but he managed to play in the higher division of our team. And one day he told us, look, guys, look at me. You would never think that I will play in the top division, but I managed to get the spot. And I've never been fast at running. Other teenagers, they naturally have been faster than me, more breath. And during our training, I was always the last one when we were running around the field. But I heard this coach, and I thought, okay, maybe I cannot change my body to become naturally fast. But when we train, I can commit to be always the first of the group and running as a first. I will not become faster, but I will be the best that I can be. And since that day, when we did the exercise of running around the field, I was always front. And that's the second element of how rugby influenced me, that growth mindset.
I
Maybe I
really
don't
like that.
have it, but I can try to do it and make it better.
Yeah, and for me, that brings indeed again that discipline of agile. Like, okay, we start where we are, and we improve ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's really what a lot of it is in agile. Huh? That's really a nice story. And it's interesting that you bring on the two sports, because judo is more like a single person sport, and rugby is then more like the team sport, and you did both. And both have, well, there's a lot of people taking from the all the yeah, how do you call it, the eastern sports, judo and aikido and everything, the whole shuai, the idea of, okay, you first learn something, then you grow some more, and then you can pass the master that teaches you. That's a lot of that we learn in agile, but again, you use the same kind of ideas in scrum as well. So and did you do them both at the same time, or was that in a certain order?
For a time, I was practicing both together. So judo was helping me also when we were fighting in the scrum. Later, I went into bodybuilding, and the extra exercise was also helping me, giving me extra strength to keep the ball or take the ball away during a ruck or a scrum.
I
Yes,
imagine you can't use the judo techniques, but at the same time, judo is also about seeing what the energy is from your opponent and seeing if you can change it without using some of the techniques. I mean, the literal techniques, but the mindset. I assume that you can
yeah.
use a lot. That's really interesting that you can combine that. It's not something I would have thought. So that's definitely something that is new for me to know. So thank you for sharing. So let's move to that second question. That if you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you?
Um, well, what comes to me is a sweet story. So maybe I already told you I come from a small city,
Hmm.
or at least it was a small when I was a teenager without my own car or motorbike and with little commute. And then I got into school far away to study computer programming. And at that time, I start to see people in my small city, older people, older boys, guys getting addicted and in petty crime. And then in this bigger city, more harsh city, not like London, but there was people for the first time in my life, I saw people living on the street, poor people. And what as naive as I was as a boy, the message that I was getting from television is that, you follow your path, you go to school, you have a profession, you do a normal life, or you go to into petty crime and you take a bad. So I was in school and it was challenging. We had a lot of freedom, like university, but it was extremely challenging. And I was asking myself what it will be of me. What if I fail? Will I get there? And that's sweet. I had a diary, a scrapbook with the whole stickers and stuff and cuts from newspaper. And I wrote these. I wrote these. What it will become of me if I fail school? Will I become a criminal or what? And my computer teacher, a female from IBM, while I was doing the exercise at the lab, pick up my diary, open it, read that part, and he had a laugh, a kind laugh, and now I see all the sweetness that there can be in
Mm.
that moment, seeing this young guy asking those questions.
Yeah, well, I think most of us, if we think about when we study, uh, yeah, we might have some desire, but we have no idea what will become of us. And yeah, especially studying, and the way I understand it, you were studying in another city, so you're far away from home. So you're a lot on your own, trying to figure out what's life, living on your own. I still remember that first year that I was living on my own was like I had the brandy and the ego to say, okay, I'm going to make it. And at the same time, you're alone in your bed in the evening, like, okay, is this it? And is how is this going to turn out? So I can relate to that story. So, but luckily you didn't become a criminal. Um, well, depending on who's looking, of course, some people might say, well, you went into IT and that's a crime on its own.
The crime of the century.
Yes, in a sense, but at the same time, I think both of us, well, we run into each other regularly, and both of us we try to make the world a better place in our own way, and trying to change the world. And I can imagine that that is also a little bit inspired of what you saw around you. That you say, okay, I want to to not become of like these people. So it could have been fear, but at the same time, I hear that it's also some kind of inspiration or some kind of thing to say, okay, let's keep moving on and let's working.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. Okay, let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest challenge, at least the biggest challenge that you want to share, and why is that a good thing to you?
I already told you I studied in computer programming, and then I went to the university to study computer science as a branch of mathematics. And it's a very theoretical field. Just to give you an idea, we defined mathematically functions that bring symbols like computer programs, interpret them, and execute them. But we start to create that from defining what is a number. So from the ground up, we
Wow.
define it mathematically and prove the correctness of our definition from a number up to an interpreter that can interpret and execute a computer program. So this is really theoretical and abstract. Even in my upbringing, I don't think I was very social, very good in developing my social skill.
Mm.
So I don't know if you start to see a tendency. Mathematics is as an exact science. What you do, you can control. You have the perfect certainty of it. And like in physics, think about that. You can predict where a planet will be in 400 years. But in life, you don't know what happened to you next.
Well, in
And
life, there's too much parameters that we don't know, and in space, we kind of predict the parameters that are there. Well, there
yeah,
might be others in 400 years, but we don't even know because we're not there. But like you say, most of the parameters are well, there's not many parameters indeed.
yeah, and so for me, agile has been a personal journey toward developing my social skill and toward becoming comfortable with uncertainty, ambiguity, with the resolving problem gradually instead of being a perfectionist. And so for me, it has been, and to also to accept lack of control and learn to react. And for me, that has been a challenge because my mathematical study, theoretical mathematical study, really influenced me and my way of thinking still today. But I went in the opposite direction to try to build also the weaker muscle, social skill, and everything else.
Yeah, because if you come from a mathematical point of view to computers, computers are also predictable in a way that if you ask them to do the same thing twice, they will come up with the same result. At least if you don't put in any random things, if you give the same
Yeah,
data, it will give the same results. And it
and,
looks very well. I remember a lot of people around me also when I started. For all of us, I would say that programming is really like, okay, there is a certainty. We do something and we get the same results. The problem is that we have these pesky users that are not predictable in a way. And so now we have to write code that is predictable for non-predictable audience, and then we have developers who are not predictable, and a lot of that. And so but
yeah,
tell me a little more, how did you discover agile? When you what was that? I assume it was as a programmer that you ran into agile. How
yeah.
was that?
I was still actually. I don't remember the first contact. I do not remember. I remember I was studying still computer science, or at least I was studying two software engineering exams. I remember that at work I was working to pay my studies. A
Mm.
coworker mentioned Agile, so I don't remember if he was the first one mentioning to me or if it was myself. At the time, we were all trying to do two things mainly. Try to understand how to make object orientation work, try to see if there was a way to make our work faster. We all felt there was a better way just around the corner, and we were trying to look at it because for sure it was going to come something better in everything: programming language, development environment, and methodologies. And we were also trying to work more as a team. It was clear that it wasn't a one-man band anymore, and so
Mm.
that's how I got into it. Extreme programming was the beginning for me.
And for you, you realized at that moment, even while studying and writing code to pay your studies, that programming was really a teamwork. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, I don't want to sell it too nicely. It didn't came immediately. The first problem at the time was about object orientation. Object orientation wasn't mainstream, but there was an intuition that there was an incredible potential. And I studied a lot how to design databases, but I didn't have the heuristic, the patterns to do the same with object-oriented code. So I started there, and when I start to grasp that, immediately after the human element start to become big. It's not about making things work on my computer anymore. It's how we work together and how we deal with our customers and get to understand them what they really want and how can we help them.
I really like that you use the phrase "it's working on my computer" and all that, because at that time that was really something that we said at that moment. It's working here. Why is it not working on your computer? And yeah, and it might be working on my computer and not working on my coworker's computer, and it might behave even differently at the customer side, and trying to understand the difference between these things. That was yeah, that was well, fun was not the word I was looking for, but that was kind of a sometimes interesting situation where we were running into. And indeed, then you need to discover, okay, co-working together with another person, and XP was helping you a lot with that. I'm hearing. And was there anything particular about extreme programming that you liked, or was it the whole package, or how should I see it?
Well, it was it was incredible. It was a connection to a community like C2.com community, design pattern community, but then it was the entry point for the social aspect of software development. And now, not just social aspect like a manager could say soft skill, but what about collective intelligence? What about
Mm.
collective creativity? What about the dynamic of building consensus together? What is fair? What is right? What works? Oh, he opened a world, an entire world for me.
Yeah, you mentioned the C2 Wiki. That was an incredible community where you also just the idea that you could type something on a website and have your IDs. That was way before blogs. That was, for the people that don't know it, that was actually the inventing of wikis. That we now know, for example, mostly from Wikipedia, but that was actually invented at the start of the agile community by Ward Cunningham, and that allowed a lot of us to communicate in a way that I could not imagine before. It was just okay, typing something and saving that ID, and then someone else was replying to that, and that was yeah. And I had no idea where these people are. They could be like you in Italy, they could be in the United States, whatever. You kind of could know it a little bit depending on the hours that people reacted to stuff. But other than that, I had no idea who these people are and in what country they were living. That was yeah, kind of insane. And for well, I assume that for you was also before even the Agile Manifesto was written, because C2 Wiki, that was really it before the Agile Manifesto even. I think I was on
No.
there. I don't know.
Yeah, it happened before, but I arrived late. I think it was the end of 2001, the beginning of 2002. In Italy at the time, most people is in Italy is not at the time. My generation wasn't good in English, and everything coming from outside was coming like frozen. So I was starting to learn to interact with the broader community. My English wasn't good enough, and sometimes my interaction were like I don't know, screaming at the sky and hoping that something was
Somebody
coming.
is answering. Yeah. Well, then again, I think a lot of us were. I'm also not a native English speaker, and I think I've learned. Oh, yeah, I was always bad at English at school, and if my English teacher would hear me now talking English all the time, he would not believe me, because I learned it by doing it. For me, Yeah, I don't want to go too much into that, but for me, I learn much more by doing and not so much in the way the school learns a language. I think that's a whole different kind of thing. And so, you talked already a little bit about that challenge, and so why was that a good thing for you? The fact that you had to learn all these new ways, these soft skills. I have some fantasy why it's good, but I would like to hear from you what for you why that was a good thing.
I I will say two things. It has come at a moment that it was also a personal development. I was changing as a person, and I was trying to get better in my social relationship and interaction. So what I was doing at work was actually helping me to become a better person.
Mm.
And then the other more obvious part at work, we know, you were saying that before, it's our work is inherently social. And trying to do this as a young adult gave me the tools to help other adults to do the same. So now when I work with other people, since I didn't got those things instinctively and naturally, I can talk about that. I can describe that. I know the challenge, how to go through that. And so I can help other people.
Yeah, I can definitely recognize that. And especially, well, I don't know what age you were, but like you say, you're still a young developer at that time. Most of us, well, if I look at how I was in the beginning, I thought I was an adult and I was able to clearly communicate and talk good with people. But if I look back now, 30 years later, it's like, okay, I learned a lot about communication and about people, and I just had a big ego and I wasn't able to do a lot of good communication. So I think I assume that indeed a lot of that is that for me that's part of being youth, that you have some ideas and you want to share them with the world, which is okay, but there is still a lot to learn, and the more I get older, the more I'm like, okay, I don't need to be the first to shout out and share it, and then yeah, that's these social skills that you're talking about. So thank you for sharing that. I want to move to that next question, that and you I think you already talked a little bit about it, and I know, well, we like I said, we run into each other a lot into to the community, and I know that you're a very passionate person. There's a few topics that yeah, you can really would defend, very passionate. So do you have any idea where that drive, where that passion is coming from?
Well, in a sense, there are some value. Basically, it's driven from my value, from the respect of the work that the Agile community did, and I do something as an act of respect. But more in general, I'm driven by curiosity, passion to improve, and the joy of collaboration and working together. So those are things that drive me. But then when you ask me the question and I try to connect the dot, after you ask me the question, I try to connect the dot, I see that I'm kind of a problem solver. It's just that I try to solve problem with computers, but also with people and teams, and also with organization. And I want to do it well, and that is where, and right and good, and that is where my passion comes from.
And is that something that you were learned at home, at school? The fact about improving the world and doing something good. Do you have any idea? Was that, I don't know, from your parents or something in school? Do you know? I don't know
Well,
if you know. Huh?
uh, improving the word is big. Let's say improving. I don't wanna picture myself. Try to
Well,
picture myself too big, but I don't know. I got bored at doing the same thing. So it's also from work, the time that we were living in, everything was constantly improving. And my teacher, my first grade teacher, she was such a progressive woman, and she was always looking forward, teaching us already gender equality such a long time
wow.
ago. And then when I move in Sweden, I say, okay, now I understand why I felt strange in Italy. This is where I feel home.
Wow. Okay. So by moving, that's interesting because by moving country, you felt more at home in your new country than in your old country. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, from some many elements. Then I learned again to appreciate the uniqueness of my country. But from social perspective and the progressive thinking of the social element of Swedish life, I felt at home. It's like why everything was so strange for me. Why I was discussing these things with the people that seems obvious to me, and now here for everyone they are obvious, and there was nothing wrong with me. I was just in the wrong place for those things.
Interesting. And how was that then to move to the UK? Because for me, it looks like the UK is a completely different country than Sweden. Was that again a big adaptation for you, or how should I see it?
Yes, for me, has been a small failure. When in Stockholm, I tried to start again as a consultant. Things didn't work well. I made my mistake there. And then I get an incredible opportunity in London to work for ThoughtWorks. Uh,
Hmm.
and I like the energy, the possibility to join even more a big part of the Agile community. And so that's how I came here. It was a challenge, yes, more challenging, more difficult city, but the work was a big drive for me to move here.
Yeah, the ThoughtWorks is well. It's not the first time I talk about or that we talk about ThoughtWorks on this show. We talked with Matteo, but a few others as well. But I mentioned Matteo because, of course, he moved from Italy also to London. Well, he's back in Italy, I think, but he works for ThoughtWorks as well. In that sense, and I think he started in London. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's interesting to see you moving forward. I want to go back a little bit because you said,
Yeah,
okay, the changing the world. It's interesting that you say that because, of course, when indeed when we talk about changing the world, a lot of people think, okay, we should be on the barricades and we should be big changes. But I also think that in agile, for me, there is a big part of okay, we make a small little change and that has a big influence, and in the end, it might change the world, maybe not for millions of people, but maybe just for a few hundred, but it still is changing the world. um,
yeah,
and I think, yeah, especially when you look at IT and if you look at agile, I think we are improving the world one way or another. Of course, not as big as some, I don't know, somebody who's launching rockets or whatever, and making sure that you invent a cure against cancer, but at the same time, it still is an influence, I think. Don't you agree?
yes. It resonates a lot what you say before, trying to do what we think is good in the small things that happen around us every day. And
Hmm.
that's the way that I approach it. I feel maybe I could do more on a biggest issue and be more involved, and I'm not. But it really resonates what you described before, trying to do good in the small things that we do every day in the way
Yeah,
that we can do it.
it's interesting that you say I can do more, and I think all of us we can do more, but at the same time, I think it's also important to do it at our scale, at our thing. I think that's also important because, well, for me, agile is also about can we do it at with sustainable pace, and some of the things, if you do it at a larger scale, might not be sustainable anymore for you as a person or for your company or for your family and all these kind of things. So yeah, I think it stays important to think about these things. Huh? It's important. Well, talking about changing the world and stuff like that, what do you consider your biggest achievement? Is that
Look, I don't have one biggest achievement. I have a few things. Um, I was well. We already mentioned ThoughtWorks. I'm very proud of that. Before I worked for Ferrari Formula One team, and I'm
wow?
incredibly proud of that. But I want to tell you a moment. a moment that happened when I was a teenager, about I think 15 years. I was taking a train. It was around 4, 5 in the morning to go to Milan, the economical capital of Italy, to present for the first time in a conference. And
At
so I
years
was,
at 15,
um, to be honest, let me do the counting. No, 18.
18, but still, it's impressive at 18 to talk at the conference. It's
And
impressive.
I was sitting in a coach in this train. I was nervously reading my notes because I have so much to say in such a short time. You know, the usual mistake of the first time speaker. I was
Yes.
doing exactly that, and there was this businessman, adult, well dressed. He was going to Milan too, and he asked me, curious, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I say, oh, I'm going in Milan. I have a session to present. And he say, oh, if you have to talk at the conference in Milan, it means you must be good at what you are doing. And
Mm.
for the first time, I realized that internet was relatively recent. All my work was in my small town. Computer was something for just a few people, and I was there in a train without anyone helping me, going in a big city to share something. Thanks to those that allow me to do that and saw potential in me. But I've been proud of that moment. I realized, okay, okay,
It is. If you look back, not many people have presented at age 18. I'm trying to help my children to learn to appreciate it, but I've seen so hard it is for many people at an early age, and I think it says a lot about what you're able to do and to accomplish if you do it, and especially if you then even travel on your own to another city, which is indeed, like you say, it's the capital of your, or what
economical capital,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, the economical capital of your country. That means a lot because you're coming from a small city and going there on your own at age 18. And so did you manage to do that because like you said you were preparing for too much? How did that presentation went in the end?
Well, if I look in retrospect, the content was good, the delivery was terrible. I didn't have XP Benelux, the feedback protocol that you teach me a long ago. I didn't have that before, so it was impossible. I have everything memorized. Every second was accounted. Everything was packed, but the content was valuable, and so it was okay.
Well, I think that's the thing. If you're a first time speaker, it's impossible to have everything right. Of course, you need to learn, and so we all learn. And if your content is already good, I actually prefer this way than the opposite. If you would have been bringing a perfect speech, but if the content would be bad, it's probably not as good. So I think especially people, if you can look at an 18-year-old and you hear that his presentation skills might not be perfect but his content is good, you'll probably say, okay, I want to see a next presentation because next time he might be even better. So that I can imagine that, yeah, it's still valuable for the people who are there. So it is indeed something. Well, you don't call it very big, but in the end, of course, you're now a lot older than that 18-year-old person. But it is a big achievement at that time, and that sense, it helps you a lot. So thanks
Yeah,
for sharing, because indeed a lot of people talk about the largest, the biggest achievement that we have recently, but it's good to also think back of the early achievements that we had in our life, and they might have a real influence, a big influence on us, and in that sense they might be the biggest achievement. Because if you would not have done that presentation, maybe you would then end up in doing something else, or a lot worse speaker for now, for example. So yeah. So thanks for
yeah.
sharing. Okay, I want to move to personal agility. Do you have a personal agility tip to share with us?
Well, I know you mentioned also in a previous interview I got into getting things done.
Mhm.
I love there are three pillars that are actually very aligned with agile, and the fourth one that instead I have stolen with agile and I use it for my time management. So that is something that I would suggest. And then there is also, in terms of personal development, as I told you before, I try to change as a person to become more comfortable with ambiguity, uncertainty, unknowns. I try to become more comfortable in giving away control. I try to become more comfortable in approaching problems in an incremental and gradual way. I learned to invite other people in my creative space and co-create things. I know sometimes you talk about vulnerability, so I want to steal this word from you to express that sense of inviting others in your creative process and be yourself vulnerable to that. I even experimented with a small game. I call it silent pair drawing. Is a small game where I ask people to pair to draw something together, and they are allowed to draw just one line, one stroke at the time, and
Mhm.
then they change a turn. And at the beginning, both of them know what they are going to draw. To draw, they are asked to draw something, and they know what is the subject, but they cannot talk. And then even they don't know, only one of the two know, and the other have to follow the flow. And when you look at this dynamic, you see all those things that in terms of personal agility are harder: to accept ambiguity, to give up control and certainty, to embrace unknowns, and to dance with someone else's music, and follow and sometimes lead, and then follow again and then lead. And so, yeah.
It's yeah. I don't know if I've done the exact same exercise as you did, but I think in a training with Alistair Coburn, he did something similar with indeed having one person draw something than someone else, and it's it's really really hard. And I'm a really bad drawer, so really I know that I am not a good drawer. And so I already had some skeptics going into that exercise, but then doing it with somebody without knowing what you're going to draw. And then, like you say, you just allow to one stroke of a pencil and with one color. Yeah, it's strange. And then you look at the result of a full team, a lot of people. And I think I've done it with, that was not just two people, but multiple people. And then so I draw something, then somebody else and somebody else, and the end result is like, whoa, I had no idea what we were doing, but at the end is really nice. With just, yeah, without talking. But like you say, you have to give up so much control, and it's frightening the first time you try something
Mhm.
like that. Huh? It's really like, I thought I didn't need that much control, and then you do an exercise like this, and then you realize like, oh God, I do have a lot of things that I'm like. And when somebody starts to draw, you're like, no, why did you do this? I wanted to do something else. And like, okay, let go. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. And you see people and myself when I try this, you want to speak to tell the other person what to do, but you don't speak, and then you try to tell them in other ways, and it's really, really hard just to let it go and follow the flow. And that's agility, and that silence make that simple task as extremely complex. So it simulates the complexity that we have in social relation and in technical challenges, and it put you there, and it shows to you how hard it is to, yeah.
Mhm. Well, it reminds me also a little bit of, there's a few documents that we have, Google documents, that we're helping out with the community, where indeed we ask people to co-write stuff, and it's really hard in the beginning to just add people, and sometimes people that we totally don't know, and then you give them you see how they add something. It's like, okay, I like what they do, and then, oh, they add something from someone else. Okay, we need to bring in that other person to let them validate that what's written about them, or that they so are called. Let's
Yeah.
and adding that community thing. And it's for me, the value is always much bigger if you let out and give it to much more people. But for every person you add, there is also a little bit anxiety if you don't know them. Like, okay, will they still understand what this document is about, or will they try to make something else out of it? And yeah, there's always that feeling like, okay, I'm giving away the control, but at the same time, like, at what level? Yeah, that's
And I have to give you credit, the document that you say and the experience that I did recently with you. It remembered me that spirit that was there at the beginning of the Agile community. So for me, it's been like, oh, it was a long time that I haven't experienced it like this in a community. So thank you for making that happen, making that dynamic
well,
happen again.
for me, it's never been a way, but yeah, partially because I create some of these documents, and I do it sometimes even with people that have totally nothing to do with agile. I did something about HR. I did something about, yeah, completely other stuff, and also about Coder Dojo, saying, okay, I was a lead coach in Ghent, and I say, okay, I'll create a document on how we work with the children and how we work with the parents. And instead of just me writing it, it was just like, okay, everybody's writing it, and yeah, it makes it so much better. So I recognize that part for me is really important. If I notice that I start in a new community, if I am in a company, I'm trying to recreate, and it is indeed hard. Sometimes in companies, people don't understand it. They want to have full control because, of course, if you're working in a bank, there are some rules and some guidelines that we have to follow. But at the same time, the people who are working in the bank, they do understand these guidelines. So it's not like they're going to throw everything away. And if there is, then someone else will, in that same community, will say, well, wait a minute, you're doing something that is not legally allowed in this context. So yeah, usually that works out fine. It's not that I've never had a problem, but for me, the problems are a lot less big than what most people are afraid of. Even including myself, because sometimes we start off something and it takes a while. Okay, I want to move to that next question about remote work. What have you worked? Let's start with the question about remote work. Did you work remote before COVID, or did you just discover it during COVID?
No, no. COVID has big change for me in terms of remote work and completely changed my opinion and
Mm,
about that. I've always been strong about face-to-face working and working together, that team feeling, and that high bandwidth of communication, tactile collaboration, hands-on together on the same piece of work.
And so then there was COVID, and all of a sudden you had to work remote. So how was that for the Luca of that moment?
Well, I learned to appreciate the positive side of it,
Mm,
work-life balance, the ability to own your time, shifting the focus from output and time at work versus outcomes. So this
mm,
shift about what are you really achieving, and a side that is useful for a coach. The conversation are more structured, so it's easy to establish a contract, and it's easy to have more structured conversation. But
yeah.
then there are also things that instead I realize are not that good about remote working.
So do you have a tip for the people here that you say, this is what I've learned, this is what really is helping me when I work remote?
No, I don't think I'm the best person to give tips there, but one related tips is about how to mix remote work and working in the office, if that can be interesting.
Yes, I think well the current advice for hybrid is usually don't do it, but let's face it, reality is that that hybrid is not going to go away. I think we have that kind of thing. So if we can learn something about it, that would be really interesting.
Well, what make me feel a little disappointed now is when I visit a company office and I see people there in the office spending all the time in a remote call, because managers has decided, not managers, someone has decided that there must be quotas to be filled about the people in the office. Instead, what I learned also from complexity is that there are different type of tasks, and every time that we have to deal with tasks that are very complex, so we need to be all together in the office and to use all the bandwidth. So my suggestion is, identify when you need to work together as a team and go together as a team in the office. Otherwise, stay at home. What is happening now that you have to fulfill quotas, you have to go some days just to open your computer and your remote call tool. That is disheartening to me when I see that.
Yeah, I recognize that I'm working for a client at this moment that is also trying to experiment and figure out what's the number of quota, and we there is a maximum because the new building is not allowing us to come all at the same time, which I can understand, but at the same time it's like, okay, can we please look at just when we go, not a time wise, but more like can we arrange ourselves? So in my current team, we're actually working like, okay, that's a day that we want to work together, and so then we're going. The others, it's more like, okay, when is the activity that's interesting? And yeah, last summer I think I spent, I don't know, a few weeks that I was just at the office for being in Zoom calls or Skype calls or whatever, and that was just horrible. Then I really said, okay, if I have to keep doing this, then I'm going to stop. Luckily, by the time that that summer was over, it was much more better organized. But it's I feel what you were saying. It's really like I want to go to the office to collaborate because I love working with people and I love and the hugging part maybe a little less in because of COVID, because yeah, I have a friend who's even today we're February 2013 2023, and still if someone a friend of mine is rather ill from COVID, so it's not over yet. So hugging is maybe a little bit too big right now, but yeah, working together if it's possible, preferable, yes, in the office for some things, but for other things, let us do the work remote. Like this conversation, yes, it
Yeah,
would be nice to sit together, but this allows me to do it from my home and for you as well, and I can just as well be with my family after this. So that's yeah. Then it is interesting to do it together, but it still is possible to do it like this. Okay, I want to move to that next question, and I think you have some interesting books there. So, what's a book that you want to talk about?
well, one book that I suggest is about the solution focus coaching. I was impressed.
I
The
think that's the
title,
book one. This one.
yes, that's Roy that suggested the book to me. I
Hmm.
had the book on my pile of books for a while. Then I read it and I was surprised to the level of alignment that it has with XP and the complexity in general. So I was really surprised. I went back to Roy and I say, wow, you didn't tell me how much it was aligned with XP values and with the complexity. And he told me, yes, yes, it is. That's why I suggest you the book. So I definitely recommend it.
I like it because I link it also to what you were talking about before, outcome based and output based, and yeah, solution focused is really like, okay, why are we doing things? And we're not doing it for having more lines of code and stuff like that. No, no, we really want to make sure that we know what's the end goal in the end. Huh?
Yeah,
that
and the idea that we can work out the solution focusing on the problem as a cause effect direct relation instead of sometimes just experimenting around that, like complexity or XP teach us with Spike and with experiments sometimes.
Yeah, I really like that. It's yeah, it is indeed something that is very important. And this book, from what I understand, is it's really about the coaching aspect. Is this correct? Because I haven't read it. I
Yes,
know it by, but I haven't read it myself.
it is about coaching, like the title suggests, adopting an approach that focus more on the solution than on dissecting the problem. But while this book describes the coaching aspects, it starts to define a number of principles that you read it and say, "Wow, they are really aligned." And so, even for someone that comes from outside technology, it communicates principles that are valid also outside computer programming.
So that means, if I understand correctly, that even yeah, I can just propose it to a manager to say, okay, that could be a good book for you to read. Is that how I should see it?
Exactly.
Okay,
A
I
manager, also a team that is not working in software development and digital, both.
okay, that's really good to know because yeah, indeed, well, we're sometimes going a little bit broader in the agile world, and then it might be good to say, okay, these are other books that are interesting to read. And I think you had another book that you wanted to talk about.
Well, inviting leadership by Daniel Mazik, a member of our Agile community. That
That's his book, and
yes,
I took the liberty to add a book of mine, The Leadership Game, next to it because this person that you see here, this little, this is, if I'm correct, the son of Daniel. So who was with him at the conference and who was for me like an insane leader because he was like. He was sitting around in the corner, was like, okay, you're going to play with Legos. Can I join? But then I said, okay, but then you can also take up a leadership position in one of these things. And he was an incredible leader at that time, like having an idea and a vision and really explaining it. It was nice to see. And I think it's, of course, well, inspired one way or another by having a father that is really thinking about leadership because Daniel is yeah he's written a couple of books and that's it's also on my plate this book because I haven't read that one but I've heard many people talk about it. So what's one key takeaway for that book that you want us to talk about? Why should I read that one?
well, it contrasts the impact of invitation as compared to imposition, the social aspect, the power dynamics, and the information that you lose when you go through imposition. So all the feedback loops and the information, and then it pointed toward promise theory, that is an algebra of collaboration, is the theory that is based on that Daniel based his work on invitation and explain why invitation works, starting from describing how autonomous distributed agents collaborate together, make promises to each other, and in the end collaborate to achieve outcomes. And again, I found a lot of parallel with the complexity, with the XP, with the planning game, and with the complexity science. So Daniel Books is good and also gave me another incredible pointer to read even more.
Yeah, it's well, yeah, it comes back to some of the things that we discussed again about you. We invite people and we ask them to indeed and to have, well, if you want to have collaboration, well, if you indeed have independent teams one way or another that indeed collaborate to each other and talk, that's what complexity is all about, and that what we see in the world. So yeah, why not I wouldn't want to say limit, but that's not what. Why not mimic that and reuse some of that? So definitely interesting to hear that, to read that theory there. Okay, I want to move to, for me, for me, one of the interesting questions, especially with you, I look forward to hearing your answer. What's, because you have already so much interesting answers. So, what's a question that I didn't ask that you want to talk about?
Well, I would like to mention some of the topics that you mentioned before. We worked together on that document, and is about some of the problems that potentially Agile is facing.
Mm,
And the hypothesis that when Agile has become mainstream, maybe we left something behind. You know the story of the two goldfish that are swimming and cross their path with the two very young goldfish, and they ask them how is the water today, and the young fishes ask, what water? It's all around us, to the point that sometimes we forget about it. So many of the elements that made agile work, when we start doing that, they are like that water, and maybe they were all around us and we forgot to codify them, and maybe we forgot to bring them in the mainstream agile, like what you were describing before, that community sentiment of sharing documents, co-creating things together, that come from the open source movement. And then there is the natural tension of every economical activity to reduce effort, to reduce cost, the process of commoditization that is perfectly natural. But we know that you can commoditize something, but in some other case, going back to promise theory, there is another things like international politics, United Nations, and so on, where you cannot commoditize that complexity, but then you create a stable relationship where doing work together become easier, because those stable relationships and getting to know each other like stable team. So maybe I told you the question, and I also gave you the answer. Apologies for that.
no, no, but I think that's indeed the kind of discussions I would like to have. Indeed, there is. I find it interesting when, and I've said it already before on this show, is that when I asked this question originally, when I created the book version, um, people that answered that went all over the place, and now if I look back at this edition, the video edition, a lot of people are talking about what's the future of agile, and how is agile still, are we still agile, and what are we not leaving behind, and what are we forgetting, and there is a lot of that. So a lot of us were thinking about it, and your question is a little bit different than all of what the other people are saying, but it's at the same time it's the same. We really need to think about what parts of agile are we forgetting, because commodities, yeah, making a commodity of something, um, it helps spreading it, and definitely I think agile has spread a lot since these early days. But what parts have we forgotten? And I think, well, these two documents that we originally talked about, or that we talked about before, is a lot about, okay, some of these things that are happening, why are we doing it, and are we still, is that still agile? Some of the methodologies, some of the things that we're, when we talk about scaling, of course the problems that we're trying to solve these days are different. The problem of one team, it's kind of solved, but when we go to scaling, we need to discover, and we need to really look back at what is it, what makes it agile. Is it just about going to as many teams as possible, or do we want to go and look for, okay, can we descale, and all of these things? I think there's a lot there to discuss. So thank you for bringing that up, because we need to think really hard about what makes it, what is agile. And I like that you bring the story of the fish, because I kind of forgotten it already, and indeed sometimes we don't know it. And if I look back, and if I hear new developers, they sometimes complain about agile, but they have no idea what agile really means, because there's so much into the water, and they don't know the water, and how different it was back in these days. And I don't personally, I don't care about the name agile, but we should really understand what does it mean, what is that into that water, and what is important about that water to make it, well, possible to swim in it. Because basically that's the thing, yeah. Because the water could be toxic or the water could be healthy, and that agile water, what's in there. So thank you for making us think about that. Okay, I want to move to that last question about, yeah, who should who should I ask next? I think you have a few people that you wanted to invite me. So
Yeah, well, at least from Joseph Perlin, that had a huge influence on me. For example, connecting the dot of complexity and
I
agile.
think that's Joseph, right?
Yes, there is.
And indeed, it's the person that I got my Scrum training of back in, I don't know, 2005, 2006, something like that. That was indeed an interesting person, because he's not coming from an IT background, and he has so much knowledge. And yeah, I think a lot of us, we learned a lot from Joseph. So could you tell me a little more, because I have lots of war stories about Joseph, but could you tell me a little bit, why do you want me to invite him?
Well, like you, I attended one of his Scrum courses. He came as an ex-XPer, then that also worked on S unit and collaborated to the discussion that led to some invention of some modern practices. But again, after attending his training, he gave me food for thought for the next 4 years. So I continued to read and learn things inspired by that training for 3, 4 years. And later on, I connected again with him. I attended other trainings on self-organizing teams. And a lot of the book that I wrote before is to document some of the things that I learned from him. So I wanted to write that down and to share them, some of the models from Joseph, models related to complexity that can help orient complexity in self-organizing system and teams.
Thank you, really, because it's indeed, yeah. He had, I think he had an influence on a lot of us, but yeah, we're now 15 years later, and well, new agilists might not always know him, and he's yeah, always. He also not a person who wants to stay front and center, but that doesn't mean that he's yeah, he didn't have an influence on lots of us. So yeah. What I think you still had some two other people that you want.
Yeah, Paolo Polce, ex co-worker in Ferrari from Connextra team. He
Is that
brought.
him? Because
Oh,
I'm
this is Giorgio Sironi. So Giorgio is a younger XPer, an agilist, younger of me. So a younger generation, and I think it's important to invite good practitioner and younger practitioners, and to make space for the younger generations.
Thank you for doing that, because indeed my goal is to not just have the old, well, depend, sorry for the other people,
Thank
but yeah,
you.
we're well, let's just face this, we're getting older. I'm 50, I'm past
Yes.
50 now, so yeah, there is wisdom in us, or at least I hope. But at the same time, it's also good to look at the future of agile, and for that we need to have the younger people, of course. And then the other person that you were talking about, I think
Paolo.
that's him. That's Paolo, I think. Yeah.
Paolo Polce from Naples worked with me in Ferrari, but even before he worked with the famous Connextra team. So, in a
Mm.
moment where we were struggling about the maintenance of a large number of units and integration tests, and we were struggling with dependencies, is brought in the learning of the test-driven technique from the Connextra teams, among other things, that are learning about design, and it made a huge difference. He also connected me and other ex-co-workers to the Connextra team, Tim McKinnon, Steve Freeman, and others. So Paolo had a huge influence. And what he brought was so different from my style of design that I had an intuition that there was something good there. And I made a leap of faith before understanding that indeed there was value, and I changed my design style.
Wow. Okay. So that's indeed a huge influence, and indeed, the company you mentioned, it's there's a lot of, well, before we talked about ThoughtWorks, that's the same thing, kind of level that was really known at that time in London, or at least I knew the people from London. Okay, I thank you for your time. It's because it's been really wonderful. Even me knowing you for so many years, I learned a lot. So thank you for sharing. Um, if people want to connect with you, what would be a good way to make a connection with you?
Well, they find me on LinkedIn with my name and surname. They
I think
recently,
that's the one, right?
that's
Did
the
I?
one. They
Okay.
find me on Mastodon. I joined recently and I enjoy the calm and healthy discussions there. I really enjoy it. And meanwhile, I also keep a presence on Twitter with the same handle that I use in Mastodon. And
I didn't add Twitter anymore because of, well, all the confusing that's happening, and yeah, I wasn't sure how many people are already on Mastodon, but I should start adding the Mastodon link because indeed many more people are moving over there, so that might be a good idea indeed. So
and
thank you very much for your sharing. It's yeah, it's been wonderful. Are there any last famous words that you want to share before we end this conversation?
no, is I want to thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and many of the things that you mentioned, you teach to me, like the leadership game. So I really want to thank you, and it's been a pleasure to be. I hope the one that will watch this will feel the same that I felt talking with you.
I hope it as well. And well, it's small growing. It's for me, it's interesting to do, and yeah, I use it, of course, as an excuse to talk to many people, and I can do that from home because I've decided this year for another year not to go to conferences, or at least not to go to conferences outside my country, because I want to be much more with my family. But at the same time, I miss so many people out here, so I thought, okay, this is for me just an excuse to talk to people like you, but do it from my home. And at the same time, I think, at least I feel that there's a lot of value in these conversations. So it's an interesting way to share what we know, because yeah. There is the fact that we're getting older, and so it's good to share some of that knowledge before it's gone for good. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.